What is going on, Internet? My name is Lou, and I make Linux and Android videos, and I put them up on the Internet. This particular video is going to be the changelog for Redemption ROM 1.0.7, and right on the top of the video, I'd like to apologize if I sound congested or stuffed up or sick. I've had a crazy case of the flu for like the last week. I mean, I haven't been sick like this in years. I'm just starting to feel a little bit better today, but still stuff is kind of hanging out in the sinuses. But anyway, this is an interesting release, one I had a lot of fun with. But before I get into the details of 1.0.7, I wanted to remind anyone new to the project about kind of the vision of the project, the long-term goal of the project, and what I believe it is and what I want to see for it in the future. So, in the world of Android, custom ROMs and mods and so on, when you're dealing with a really popular device like the Galaxy Nexus, the last big device I had worked on was the HTC Incredible a couple of years ago. Um, you're going to see a host of custom ROMs for a device like that. And a lot of these ROMs all look very similar. Because what ends up happening over a span of time is you get people using features from other people's work and combining things and so on. And that's all well and good. I mean, to each his own. But I think eventually what ends up happening is you get a lot of ROMs that look very, very similar, very little distinction between them, and there doesn't seem to be any really stated goal or vision for the project. And I think that's important. It's important to me as a developer, someone who spends a lot of time in this work, that I have a clear and concise direction for what I'm trying to do, and I keep that in mind with each revision of my project. And not only that, I want to be different than all the other projects, not because it's a popularity contest. I do this as a hobby and I do this for fun. I'm not trying to compete with anyone. I just want to make sure that I'm not wasting my time or anyone else's time by reproducing work that already exists. So, with that said, what is Redemption ROM? Redemption ROM is for the AOSP purist, somebody that really enjoys the stock look and feel of Android, particularly in this case, Ice Cream Sandwich. That's me. I love the stock look and feel of Ice Cream Sandwich. Take my desktop for instance. I'm running Linux Mint 12. As you can see, for anyone who's ever used Linux Mint, I've disabled all of the Linux Mint specific extensions and themes, and I like the stock bare bones GNOME shell. That's just kind of who I am. And I decided to make this ROM actually from someone who I used to interact with back in the HTC Incredible days. I wasn't going to make a ROM, and that individual said, because there's a lot of heavy hitters already producing content for the Galaxy Nexus, and I thought there was already going to be, a sufficient amount of options. Excuse me, sneeze. Anyway, I wasn't going to make a ROM because I thought there was already going to be plenty, and I didn't want to duplicate any efforts. If I wasn't going to bring something unique and individual to the table, I just didn't want to do it. And he encouraged me, and he said, everyone likes something different. You've got something different, and there may be a group of people that'll enjoy it. So I said, why the heck not? And I'm glad I took his advice because I've really enjoyed putting this together. And I'm going to get into some of those specific reasons with this particular release. But think of Redemption ROM, you Linux users, as like the LTS of Ice Cream Sandwich. When you look at an LTS release in Linux, we're coming up on Ubuntu's LTS, the 1204. There's not a lot of experimental features. They focus on stability. They focus on bringing you updated packages. They focus on under-the-hood performance. They focus on squashing bugs from the previous release. And they focus on making it future-proof. And by that I mean, it's a long-term support release, so it's going to be around for a while, and they want to make sure that it's bulletproof and can stand that test of time. That's what Redemption ROM is. And on this note, you're going to see some projects releasing nightlies, meaning they have the experimental versions of their builds being released on a night-to-night basis. Some use bots, some release them manually. I don't do that. You also get people who are putting out updates every couple of days or maybe even once a week. Don't expect that from Redemption ROM, because again, what I provide is a out of the box, very pure AOSP experience as far as the user interface is concerned, and a lot of my work happens underneath the hood. So really, when you think about optimization and squashing bugs, there's only so much you can do. So for all those crack flashers out there, Redemption ROM is probably not for you. For all those people that want a ROM that just works, that's reliable, dependable, that they can count on, that's high performance, that still has that same stock ROM feel, like when you just took your brand new Nexus out of the box and booted the thing up, this is for you. So just keep that in mind. Let's head over to Roots Wiki, where the Redemption ROM thread lives, and we'll take a look at the changes you can see in 107. Okay, so here we are at the Redemption ROM thread. I want to remind people that I did put this little backup tool that I created, Redemption Backup, that came out in version 106. You run this tool in the Android terminal. Okay, so all you've got to do, and I include instructions here on how to use this, is you got to just open up the Android terminal app, which I include in the ROM. You're going to type SU to gain super user privileges. Okay, and then all you got to type is RB for Redemption Backup. That's it, and then hit enter. Type RB, hit enter. It'll back up all of the applications you've installed from the market. So in between upgrading Redemption ROM versions, you can back up all your applications. This does not back up data. For those of you who've been around with me for a while, you know how I feel about backing up data. It'll just back up your apps. I'm probably going to put another script together that will restore these apps, but for right now, what you're going to do to restore the apps is after you, wipe your device, format your system, wipe all your caches, the usual preparation that you take before you install a new ROM. You're going to, boot in to the new upgraded version, and then open up ES File Explorer, which I've included in the ROM. Navigate to the Redemption Backup folder on the SD card, and then just install the apps one by one. It takes seconds. Literally, in under a minute, I can install all of the applications that I usually use. So pretty easy, and it's a little tool, so don't forget that this is in there. You can back up your applications. So if you're watching this video before upgrading to 1.0.7, make sure you back up your apps. All right, let's scroll down here to the changelog. Okay, here we go. 107. I've updated this with all the 4.0.4 proprietaries. People get a little confused with what this actually is. Let me be clear. There is no one that's producing an AOSP ROM that is producing a 4.0.4 version of Ice Cream Sandwich. They're just not. The source code hasn't been released. What they may be using, they may be pulling certain files from the 4.0.4 leak that came out not too long ago. And in this case, I'm just using the proprietary, and I'm not even using all of them. I'm using some of the proprietary blobs from that leak. Meaning, these are proprietary files that the AOSP project or the Android open source project does not include in their code, and that you have to take from a retail version of that particular ROM for your device. In this case, the Samsung Galaxy Nexus. Those are the only things I'm using from that leak. Well, I take that back. I'm also using some of the audio files as well. The retail version of the audio files, which I really like, meaning ringtones, notifications, alarms, camera, touch tones, things of that nature. That's all I'm using from that 4.0.4 leak. So this is still, as far as the AOSP code, 4.0.3, but the only thing that I'm including from 4.0.4 is the proprietary blobs that is not included in the Android open source project. Okay, so that's that. I got an SSD, I guess almost a month ago now, maybe less, for my desktop. And previous to the SSD, I had a 1 terabyte, mechanical hard drive, and I used, that drive for my primary OS. So 1 terabyte, 7200 RPM Seagate. I wanted to get the extra added performance of solid state, so I upgraded. I got 128 megabyte Crucial M4 solid state drive. That's now my boot drive. I have my OS on there. And I'm using that 1 terabyte Seagate as just a storage drive now, secondary drive. And, as many of you know, I'm a full-time Linux user. And so basically, I wanted to see what I had to do under Linux to optimize the performance of that drive. And without getting into too much, Linux desktop stuff, basically what you have to do is you got to edit a file in the etc directory called fstab. You got to add a few entries. One of them we'll be talking, excuse me, about today. It's called no A time. And then the other thing you got to do is, well, you don't have to, but again, we're looking for optimization. Is you have to change the I/O scheduler you're using. Now you can do this by editing a file in the etc directory, rc.local, I believe it is, or you can recompile a kernel with that specific scheduler, which I did, and that's the Noop scheduler. Now, for any of you that are using Redemption ROM, you're already using the Noop IO scheduler because I have it included in the Defiant kernel by default. So those are a couple of things that you got to do to optimize SSD under Linux. Now, that also goes for flash memory as well. So all SSD and flash memory. It just so happens that our device, the Samsung Galaxy Nexus, has a flash memory. It's a flash memory device. So, I started thinking to myself, I've been kind of so engrossed in how to really optimize this SSD under Linux. Wouldn't it be cool if I tried to apply some of the same optimizations to the flash memory here on our Android device, kind of a pseudo Linux device? And it was kind of like a challenging thing. I wanted to see if I could, accomplish it. The problem, not the problem, but the issue that you run into is Android doesn't use an fstab file. Okay, now that fstab file basically indicates how the system mounts your file system, your boot drive. If you have any media devices like an MP3 player, if you have your actual physical hard drives, it controls all the mounting for all those things, and all the options that those things mount with. So I started doing some research, and there's very little research on the web about no A time and Android. But what I did, start thinking about is, well, all right, we've got BusyBox, okay, so I could use, say, something like an init script to run at startup, okay, and I could call on BusyBox to remount all the specific areas of the file system that I wanted with those specific entries. Okay, so I gave that a whirl. I started playing around with the script a little bit, and I got it to work. Okay, so by default, I also noticed that certain parts of the file system, Android by default was booting with no A time, but not all of them. I've actually still don't have every single part of the file system running or mounting with no A time. However, I do have most of it. There's a couple parts of the system that are still mounting with an option called rel A time. What is this? Well, there was an interesting article that I read that even Linus Torvalds himself kind of piped in on, and he basically said that you've got kind of a couple of options. You got A time, rel A time, and no A time. Linus actually was advocating that these options get actually included in the kernel by default, so you don't have to do it in the user space. But that feature hasn't been adopted as of yet into the Linux kernel. However, he's basically said that rel A time is a good happy medium between A time and no A time. But the option that offers the least amount of overhead is no A time, which means it offers the fastest user space performance. And it's what I'm using on my desktop, and I figured, hey, if it's good enough for the desktop, it's going to be good enough for this device, the Samsung Galaxy Nexus. Essentially what it does is it limits the amount of writes to disk, okay, which increases performance. And interestingly enough, if you limit the amount of writes to disk, in theory, you're extending the life of your hardware. So it's kind of a pretty cool feature when you get to say, hey, I added something that not only is going to increase performance, but increase the life expectancy of the hardware. So that's what no A time does. It limits the amount of writes to disk, which in turn, again, increases performance. So I am mounting the file system, the majority of it, with the no A time option. Okay, so that's what that is. I've included an init script. It's a performance script. Essentially what it does is, again, it includes these file system tweaks. It also includes some virtual memory tweaks, so that should speed things up a bit. make the system feel a little bit more fluid. Some network tweaks, which in theory should speed up the page loading in your web browser. So you should notice pages load quicker as you're browsing the web. I also added, let's see here, another initd script. It's a zip-align on boot script. Honestly, this I did not author. This has been floating around the internet for a very long time. I don't reboot my device very often, but some people do, and it doesn't hurt to zip-align all your applications on boot. So that's what that particular script does, okay? Zip-aligning, for those of you who don't know, basically compresses your applications, your APKs, which essentially are just zip files. It compresses them, and it makes, obviously their file size smaller, which increases RAM efficiency, and obviously, RAM efficiency is good. It means your system's faster. So that's that. I'm going with the Defiant version 3 kernel. Why did I do this over the version 4 kernel? There is only really one main difference between version 3 and version 4. And that really was the screen off CPU, a maximum CPU voltage was reduced from 700 megahertz down to 400 megahertz. At this point, my testing hasn't seen that it didn't yield the net benefit that I was hoping it would, as far as battery life was concerned. So I decided to go with version 3, and some people are having issues installing it. So I decided to stick with version 3 for now. That's really the only reasons why I went with version 3. Version 3 has had extremely good feedback. I followed the thread. I've had a lot of people send me messages telling me that version 3 has been running really well. There's some ROMs out there that are even running this, I think, by default. So it's a pretty popular kernel amongst the releases I've had for the Defiant project. So I decided to stick with version 3. I think I fixed Exchange, the Exchange calendar syncing issue. I released some RCs to some testers, and I got reports back that their Exchange calendars were syncing. However, I did get a PM on Roots today from a user that said they didn't see their Exchange calendar. So, and while I'm on that topic, guys, if you tell me you're going to test something, please report feedback on a regular basis. When I say I need this tested, I need some testers, and this is what I need you to test, be sure to, and I'm going to need you to reply to feedback to me probably on Twitter. I don't want to clog up the thread on Roots with a bunch of beta testing responses. I want us to leave that for final release, so just keep that in mind. I'm going to do this mainly on Twitter. I'll announce it on Twitter, and I need your feedback. If I say I need people to test Exchange calendar syncing and NFC tags, I need people that use Exchange calendar and NFC tags, and then I need you to really provide that feedback to me. I don't want to have to drag it out of anybody because, I don't use Exchange calendar and I don't use NFC tags, so it's nothing I can test. So I need people to be able to provide me that feedback. So if you accept a test request by me, please provide me that feedback. It'd be greatly appreciated. As far as I know, I've had reports of people saying that it's working just fine. Aside from that 1 p.m. I got on Roots today, we'll see. NFC tags have been reported to work. I got this file, this library file, which I believe corrected the issue from Roman's Git. So big thanks to him for that. Credit to him. I already mentioned the switch to the retail audio, so that's good. I added Google Maps. I had it removed for an issue, I believe, in 106, maybe for 105. It was a permissions issue that kept happening. I've since squashed that bug. Maps is working just fine, so I included Maps. I also included what's the name of the application? I believe it's like an ebook reader. Yeah, an ebook. One of the Google apps. It's an ebook reader app. On the topic of applications, I've updated all the gaps, so you're running the latest version. I've also updated all the other apps that I included in the data app directory. These are applications that don't come with AOSP by default, something like Android Terminal, ES File Explorer, things of that nature. Those are all updated to their latest versions. I've also added the Goo Manager support. Okay, so if you open up, those of you who are using Goo Manager, and I highly suggest that you do, Goo Inside Me, big shout out to them. They are the people who are providing me with my web hosting for Redemption ROM, for my kernels, any themes or apps I ever produce as well. Without them, I couldn't provide this content to you. So big thank you to the people over there at Goo, because again, without them, this wouldn't be possible. I'd have to create a website, have all my own file hosting. It'd be a big expense to me, something extra I'd have to maintain, which, all that time would then be detracted from the time I spend working on this ROM. And, again, by providing this service, they do a lot of things for me. So I just really want to thank them. And they have this really cool application, which I've now included in Redemption ROM by default. So if you open up Goo Manager, up in the right-hand corner, open up your menu. From here on out, all you've got to do is, in that contextual menu, you select the option that says check for ROM updates. And if I've uploaded anything to Goo, a new version of the ROM, it will let you know that there's a new version available, and then give you the option to download it. So that's pretty cool. And just kind of a little kind of tip, I will update certain betas, or upload certain betas, or maybe even my final release early before announcing it up on Goo. So keep an eye on that from time to time, because you may see something up there in the Hey It's Lou ROM section or kernel section that hasn't been posted yet, and you may be able to download it and get a sneak preview. So keep an eye on that. But that's it for this particular release, guys. Pretty happy with this. What keeps me really pumped up about Redemption ROM, not only do I like a really high performance ROM, obviously, highly optimized, but I'm really starting to join the two worlds of Linux and Android, kind of my two passions as far as tech is concerned. A lot of the principles and a lot of the things that I use in my Linux systems, I'm able to implement in Android, and I think it's amazing that I can actually incorporate those kind of two worlds together. For those of you who don't know, Linux isn't necessarily Android. It's kind of like a pseudo-Android system. And for those of you who don't know, Android does not run natively on our devices. It actually runs in a virtual machine. So for those of you who've ever used VMware, or say something like Oracle's VirtualBox, although performance can be very good, it's still a virtual machine. Okay, so my sister has a iPhone 4S, and I was taking a look at it the other day, and I'm thinking to myself, man, this thing is laggy. It needs a kernel update. Obviously, you can't do it. One of the things I love about Android is obviously how open it is and how customizable it is, especially if you have an AOSP device. My Galaxy Nexus runs circles around that 4S, and that's in a virtual machine. My hopes is that one day Android will run natively on our hardware, because if it runs this well in a virtual machine, I can't imagine how well it would run natively on the hardware. And I'm still not quite sure why Android doesn't run natively on the hardware. I don't know if it's a driver thing. I don't know what it is, but you've got projects like Migo, which is Linux, running natively on hardware. Not quite sure what the story is like with that. And you got that very popular device, the Nokia N900. You could run in a full, say something like Debian install using apt, fully functional phone on your handheld device. Why we don't have this from Android yet? Maybe there's some really obvious answer that I'm just not aware of, but I love Android, and the performance is very good, but imagine the performance natively on hardware. That's my hope one day. So anyway, enough on that tangent. Hope you guys really enjoy this release. It's by far, I think, the most polished, stable, high-performance release yet. But anyway, make sure you leave comments. Excuse me. You leave comments in the thread. Okay, the feedback, the comments, that helps other new users to the project. So please make sure you are active in the ROM thread. Also, I'm more apt to give pre-release software out to the people that are really active in the thread. So when I see that you're active, you may get a little PM from me saying, "Hey, here's the final version of 108 of Redemption ROM. I haven't released it yet, but I wanted to just say thank you for how active you've been in the thread." So I do keep an eye on that, and I sent out probably 20 or 30 emails with 107 pre-release links, download links. So I do that. Oh, and before I forget, I did release 107 early to some of you, the 20 or 30 I just mentioned. I mentioned this in the ROM thread and on Twitter. I have revved it once. There was a few things I wasn't quite happy about, and I changed a couple of things, specifically in the launcher. So the 107 final that I released to you guys early, there is another update. Sorry guys, it happens. I'm OCD and I want to make sure everything's perfect. I believe what I have here is perfect. So make sure to download the newest version after you watch this video. That is the most up-to-date version. Okay? Hope you guys enjoyed, and until next time, we will catch you later.